So what advice would you give to somebody who has Asperger's, who wants to have a better dating life, be able to communicate with women, and have the social and sexual life that he wants? Despite the fact when most of the advice that he gets from experts who are basically telling him how to communicate with women is going to work against him. So if you are somebody who has Asperger's or autism, give this a listen and watch. This is not a replacement for therapy or expertise or psychology. Please go seek out that help. But this is going to be some expert dating advice from somebody who's worked with many people who have Asperger's, who have autism, who have learned to communicate with women, have the dating and sexual lives they like, and not feel bad about it. Let's get started.
Hey guys, my name is Steve Mayeda and I'm a men's coach in Austin, Texas. I'm a BJJ practitioner, a Wim Hof enthusiast. I have an amazing family, 4 awesome boys and a beautiful wife. And what this podcast is about being the better man. What we talk about is tried and true because we've been doing it with groups of men just like you for over 12 years. Listen up and I hope you enjoy.
All right, we're back. So probably one of the most important things that you're going to get from this is that we have communities. And so the number one thing is, if this is resonating with you right now, I want you to go to the links down below and join the free Facebook group for Austin Men's Development. Also, if you want some tools, you can go to the Instant Connection course. There's also a link down below for that. But be a part of our community, because the answer that I'm going to give you for this comes from our community, and a free community at that. So funny enough, this question was asked on our Men's Development Excellence Board, which is a paid tier membership from a new member who has Asperger's. But I actually answered this question for somebody who has autism, who's a part of our free Austin Men's Development group, where you can see the answer there. So that's what I'm going to cover with you today. Now, I do want to make this clear. I'm not a psychologist or therapist. I am a professional dating coach, and I'm very good at it. But at the same time, this does not replace what your therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist might say. I also don't have autism or Asperger's, so I tend to explain things not in a literal particular sense. So I'm going to do my best to communicate to guys who might be listening to this who have autism or Asperger's, because you like things very literal. So what happened is, one of our members of our free group for Austin Men's Development came to a trial period of our live local meetups here in Austin. Now, if you live anywhere in the world, you can still partake in our communities. But if you do live in Austin, you can actually come to local meetups. It's pretty cool. He actually had been coming to our groups, and he has autism, and asks a lot of questions about dating. It's a very frustrating thing for him, and we really want him to get results. So he asked me for some advice on what he could do to meet women, because he meets women and they don't want to date him, or they don't like him, or they give him a number, or they make an excuse why they're not going to call him, or if he does text him or call him, they don't text back. Now, there's a lot that could go into this that isn't just the words you say. First off, with this particular guy, he needs to change his body language. He needs to work on that intensely. He needs to do a lot of mirror exercises, and those are things that we could break down in another video, but we're not going to talk about them in this video. Even if you don't have autism or Asperger's, learning dating skills takes time, and it can't be accomplished in a 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-minute video and so on. It takes time. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you something to learn to read people better, which will help, and I've done this countless times with many people who have autism and Asperger's. And in fact, they can read people oftentimes better than me now. Very true story, and I'm very good at this. It's also going to teach you how to talk to people and do an exercise which I call calling it out, which means saying what people notice about you right away so that it's not weird and they might accept you a little bit better. Now, the result that you should get out of this is, over time, after doing it maybe 100 times in the right way, which is not that hard to do. You know, it's going to take you less than a month to do that. You can learn some social intelligence about reading people, but more importantly, you'll be able to have conversations with people with the real them and the real you coming out, which will allow a connection to happen. And this is really what you want. You want that connection of the real them and the real you coming out. How you're going to see that is a motivation from them to want to talk to you more. Maybe that means dating you, maybe that means being your friend, but you're going to start to build friendships and connections with people where you didn't in the past. So those are the specific results you should be looking for. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up on the Austin Men's Development Board this thread that I'm looking at, And basically I say, hey, look, this was the exercise, because the gentleman kind of repeated back the exercise to me and it was not right. So number one, we're gonna go to a public place where we can people watch people, where we can see a stranger. And for about a second, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds, we're gonna get a blink reaction on that person. Meaning that very quickly, we're gonna see somebody and we're gonna try and get a read on them. Now in this, we're not staring at them, we're not trying to make them feel uncomfortable, we're getting a blink reaction, meaning like, I just take a look, lasts about a second, no more than 3 seconds, because then we're using a different part of our brain and I want you to exercise this kind of immediate awareness sort of brain. Did I say that right? Anyway, your blink part of the brain. I want to start exercising that. So what you do is you just get that blink read on that person and then you go to phase two. Phase two, I want you to think about, via their body language, via what you saw, what you think they're thinking, how they're feeling, okay? And this is something that you may not even be able to get on the map with right away. But you're just gonna take a look, like for instance, I might look at this tree next to me and I just look at it and I go, oh man, you know, what did I notice about it? Okay, and for a short time, we're gonna think about what we noticed. In that 1 second or less that I looked at that, but no more than 3 seconds, we're just gonna look at this and try and get an assessment of it. Now for less than 1 minute, I'm gonna try and think about what I noticed. Okay, so I noticed with that tree that it had some coloration that was a little bit different, some weathering on the side of it. That might mean that, you know, storms may have come in through this way. In any case, what you're gonna do with a person is you're gonna get that blink reaction and notice something. This may be very difficult for you, but you might notice, man, they seem stressed, they don't seem stressed, they seem like they had a bad day. Try and start guessing who they are, what they think. Now that phase two part of the exercise, I want to take no more than 1 minute. You can write it down, you can keep it in your head. That matters a little bit less to me, but I just want you to see them for a moment, notice something about them, and build up a story behind it. Number three is you're going to then approach them. So after a minute of thinking whatever you were thinking, I want you to approach them. I want you to go up to wherever they're sitting, talking, standing, and take into consideration politeness and so on. We're not really covering the bases with that, but a lot of times guys that I work with who have Asperger's do that in a way which may not be, you know, polite, it might come across offensive and so on. I want you to have manners when doing that. Now, number four is when we do approach them, so number 3 and 4 are very close together. 3 is to approach, number 4 is what you're gonna say when you approach, is I want you to get in front of them. I want them to see you. I want you to stand anywhere from 3 to 4 feet away from them. Now there are times and situations where you might get closer or might get further apart, but that's a good general rule, 3 to 4 feet away. And I want you to say to them, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you, but I wanted to ask you something. Now, this technique of opening is called using a buffer, meaning I'm saying something before I talk to them to buffer the situation. Kind of like a bumper on a car buffers the car and maybe the wall or the other car in front of you that you might accidentally make contact with. So I want to use a buffer by saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you, but I want to ask you something. Now, number 5 is we're going to move on to the second phase of that conversation. So after the buffer, we're going to say, I have autism or Asperger's, and I wanted to ask you a question about what you were thinking. So it's fairly simple. We're just going to approach, once we do our 1 minute blink reaction or blink assessment or whatever we want to call it, we're going to do the buffer of saying, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you, but I wanted to ask you a question. We're going to then move on to the second part of the conversation, which is point 5 in this whole series of what we're teaching you. And we're going to say, you know, I have autism or Asperger's, whichever one you have. I have Asperger's, and I wanted to ask you something about how you were thinking. You could say I have autism or I have Asperger's, and I wanted to ask you a question about what you were thinking. Very easy, very acceptable by most people, and you know what? Some people may not like it. That part of the exercise is what we call calling it out. We are calling out something that people immediately notice about us. Now, if you have autism or Asperger's, most likely people are going to notice there's something a little bit off about how you're communicating. And that's not because you're a bad person, that's not because you're hopeless, that's not because people hate you. That's because you're communicating differently. So they need to know you're communicating differently. So that point 5 is calling it out. I have autism or Asperger's, and I wanted to ask you a question about what you were thinking. Now at this point, what I want you to notice, because what we teach here is social dynamics, meaning that there are predictable things that come up in socializing, and we can prepare for them and move things in different ways so that we have more favorable results. I want you to notice that there's going to be about 4 responses that you're going to get to this. So the first response we'll call response A. They're going to tell you what they were thinking. Basically, you ask them what they were thinking and they're going to tell you. Now the second one we'll call B. They're going to give you advice. Now advice is great and it's kind, but it's not good for making connections. Advice is usually based off of judgment and it enforces detachment. So advice might be like, oh, well, if you have autism or Asperger's, maybe you should approach or talk to somebody in this way. That's advice. Now, it's compassionate, it's nice. They're trying to be a nice person, but it's not the connection that we want. We want them to let their guard down and be able to freely communicate with us. The third type of response that they're going to give we'll call C, which is probably going to be the most common, which is confusion. They're going to ask you more about what you're asking and why you're asking it. So that might come across as something like, what are you asking again? Okay, so you have autism, what's happening? You might need to repeat the question or explain it more. In fact, this has a massive advantage once you get into some higher level social dynamics. You actually want people to be intrigued or somewhat confused because it will help them pay attention to you. So let's say if they're confused and they say like, "What? I'm sorry, what are you asking? Okay, who are you? You're what?" You just smile and you try and act as natural as possible, but this is part of the learning process. And you say like, oh, well, I'm sorry, I must not have made myself clear. I have autism or Asperger's, and I'm asking you basically what you were thinking right now. I'm doing an exercise. So you just explain yourself. It's fairly simple, but a lot of people need that extra explanation. Now, the fourth response you'll get is going to be D, and that might be that they just don't want to talk to you. They just say, I'm busy, or excuse me, or I'm not ready right now, or they just don't acknowledge your presence. This is something which is totally fine, and you're going to get, even if you have great social skills, you're going to run into that. Now, if you get that D response where they don't want to talk to you, you just smile, you try and act natural and comfortable, and you say, hey, sorry to bother you, you have a good day. So it's fairly simple. Like if we get that D response, we can just say, hey, have a nice day. At this point, we do want to have them express what they were thinking, which will be hard and difficult for them, and you may not get a really thorough answer from them, but you do want some answer. So let's say you do the blink reaction, you think about it for less than a minute what you're going to say to them, and then you approach and you say your buffer, and you say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I have a question for you. It'll only take a minute. And then you move on to the fifth part, the second thing that you're going to say, and you're just going to say, you know, my name's Steve and I have autism and I'm doing an exercise right now and I just wanted to know what you were thinking. Let's say they're confused, which will be probably the most common thing, like, okay, what? Just say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make myself unclear, but I have autism and I don't communicate too well, or I think I do, but I'm just trying to figure out what people are thinking. So what were you thinking just now? Like, what's going on in your head? And they might say something like, oh, I'm just doing homework or something of that nature. Or I was thinking about calling my mom, or I was thinking that I'm way too stressed, or I'm thinking that I'm stressed and I really don't have time for this conversation. This is what you want. Just that simply is what you want right now. Now, once they tell you what they're thinking, you're just gonna then exit yourself from the situation. You're gonna say, hey, thanks, have a nice day, I appreciate your time. And then you're gonna leave, okay? Now, what you do after that is you're going to take your assessment of what you thought beforehand and you're going to compare it to what they were actually thinking. We can only make so much of a video right now. This is kind of step one, but ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to start comparing the two of those things. You're going to see how close you got with how they thought. You're then going to start to realize that sometimes when, oh man, these dogs, they interrupt the entire production flow of everything. So where were we? Okay. You're then also going to start to realize that there's a phenomenon of when somebody might be answering a question from you, but it wasn't really that genuine. So they may have told you what they were thinking, but it probably really wasn't what they were thinking. And this is kind of that next level of things, but we got to start here. We got to start here first. Essentially what we want to do is we want to start comparing our blink reactions with the responses that they gave us. We want to see how close we were, and in this we're going to start to build some social intelligence. If we do this enough, we're gonna start to build social intelligence. We're gonna start to be able to read people, and the byproduct and result from that is we're gonna start to have better conversations. A lot of the tensions or a lot of the lack of expression that you usually give yourself or that you broadcast to other people is going to lessen. So this is an exercise in that. Now, I imagine that if you have autism or Asperger's, you're gonna have a ton of questions about this. You're gonna try it and you're going to, wonder if you did it right. It might seem too complex to you, but I want you to do it, and I want you to be able to go on the Austin Men's Development Board and be able to ask for feedback. I'll help you out with it. It will work for you if you do work it in this way. This is not the only exercise that guys who have autism or Asperger's that I work with that achieve success to get the relationships that they want do, but it is the one that we almost always start with. So if you start with it, you can expect to get some results. The other thing is that you should expect to do it about 100 times. That could take a month depending on how long you do it. It could also take 6 months. So I would say it's better in the shorter period of time that you do it, not all in one day, but within a month's time is a good, healthy way to start doing this. And that way you'll start to build some social intelligent muscles. In any case, guys, I hope this was helpful. Go to the Austin Men's Development Facebook group, interact there. You could also email me directly at steve@thesexuallife. But guys, there are ways for you to be social. You will have to work at it. It will be frustrating. It will be something that you're not used to, but you can get results and you can get success, and it actually is easier than you think. A couple of bad days, maybe a bad month or two is worth it for a lifetime of being able to interact and socialize with people when you thought it was impossible. All right, we'll talk to you guys soon. Later.